Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is to analyze the recent financial news and give you some real clarity on what actually matters. We're aiming for understanding over, just urgency.
Exactly. And we've distilled this down into three key areas for you. First, the strategic moves of these corporate behemoths. Then, some big pivots in U.S. trade policy.
And finally, the battles over the cost of living in major U.S. cities.
That's right.
So let's start at the very top. After 60 years, Warren Buffett has handed the reins of Berkshire Hathaway over to Greg Abel. But the real story isn't just the succession, is it? It's the context.
It's the context entirely. Abel is inheriting a record $358 billion cash pile.
An enormous amount of money. What does a company even do with that? How does that define their future?
Well, it creates a completely new mandate. Buffett was famous for his patience, for avoiding what he called pricey deals, and that's how the cash built up.
Right.
But Abel can't just sit on it. He's now basically forced to hunt for massive, entirely new types of deals. It's a huge shift in strategy.
And speaking of unprecedented amounts of cash, let's talk about NVIDIA. Their free cash flow is projected to top $96 billion this year.
Just incredible numbers, all driven by the AI boom.
And they just spent $20 billion of it on a, quote, non-exclusive licensing agreement with a startup called Grok. Why structure a deal that way? And maybe for our listeners, what exactly is AI inferencing?
Okay, so inferencing is basically the application phase. It's when a trained AI model takes in new data and makes a decision. It's the low-cost, high-volume part of AI, and it's absolutely critical for scale.
I see. So why not just buy Grok outright?
Because NVIDIA is just too dominant. An outright acquisition would trigger every antitrust alarm bell in Washington immediately.
Ah, so they're avoiding scrutiny.
Exactly. They are renting the innovation and the talent through this huge licensing deal. They get the tech they need, and Grok stays independent, which acts as a kind of legal firewall.
That's some serious strategic maneuvering at the top. But let's check in on the stress points. Saks Global is preparing to file for bankruptcy.
Yes, and that's a stark reminder, isn't it? We're talking about AI billions, but you have these debt-laden luxury retailers who are facing a really severe slump.
And that corporate stress, that pressure on prices, it always translates into political friction.
It always does. Which brings us to trade policy, where affordability is suddenly overriding everything else.
The tariff reversals really prove that point. President Trump just delayed tariff hikes on imported furniture, and then the government slashed those proposed duties on Italian pasta from, what, a staggering 92%?
Down to the low single or double digits for major exporters, it's a huge reversal.
Is this about genuinely managing inflation, or is it more of a short-term political move to ease frustration?
The sources really suggest it's the latter. These are quick policy reversals happening when household budgets get hit hard enough to create voter backlash.
And we're seeing that same pressure in housing too, right, in Los Angeles?
Absolutely. LA is tightening rent controls for the first time in decades.
Which means immediate relief for, I think, 500,000 rental units. Their increases are now capped at just 1% to 4%.
A huge tangible win for tenants in the short term.
But isn't the classic economic argument that rent control always backfires?
I get.
That it discourages new construction long term?
That is the core tension. You have local, state power prioritizing immediate social stability over what most economists would say are long-term economic incentives. Developers are certainly worried it'll depress investment.
So when we put all these pieces together for you, what's the big picture? On one hand, you have a really strong market. The S&P 500 was up 16% in 2025, with individual investors becoming a real force.
And on the other, you have this paradox. Capital is consolidating into these giants like Berkshire and NVIDIA who are making these enormous strategic plays. At the same time, state power, from Washington all the way down to LA City Hall, is laser-focused on managing the social costs of all that.
The affordability crisis, basically.
Exactly. So the provocative thought for you to take away is this. What happens when these two massive trends, this unprecedented creation of private wealth and the government's increasingly desperate efforts to impose affordability, what happens when they finally collide? That's the tension you really need to watch.